Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we explore a story that has remained one of the most discussed and debated paranormal cases in modern British history. It is a story that began in an ordinary house in a quiet town in northern England during the 1960s. What started as small disturbances inside a family home would eventually grow into a series of events that many witnesses described as deeply unsettling and difficult to explain. The case became known as the story of the Black Monk of Pontefract. Reports from the time described unexplained noises, objects moving without clear cause, and disturbances that seemed to occur within the walls of a house on East Drive in the town of Pontefract. Over time, the activity was said to become more intense, drawing the attention of neighbors, investigators, and eventually the wider public. If you are new here, this channel focuses on calm, long-form storytelling designed for relaxation and quiet listening. Many people enjoy these documentaries in the evening while unwinding after a long day, or while preparing for sleep. The pace is steady, the tone is gentle, and the goal is simply to explore real historical mysteries in a way that allows the mind to slow down and settle. The events surrounding the Black Monk case took place in a period when interest in paranormal phenomena was growing across Britain. Reports of unexplained activity in private homes were sometimes described as poltergeist cases, a term used to describe disturbances that appeared to involve objects moving or noises occurring without a visible source. In Pontefract, the reports from a single family would soon become one of the most widely discussed examples of such a case. What makes this story particularly intriguing is that it was witnessed not only by the family living in the house, but also by neighbors, visitors, and investigators who came to observe the activity. Some believed that something unusual truly occurred within the home. Others argued that the events could be explained through natural causes, misunderstandings, or psychological factors. Tonight, we will explore the history of the house, the family who lived there, the disturbances that were reported, and the many explanations that have been proposed over the years. Like many historical mysteries, the story does not offer simple answers. Instead, it invites us to examine the events carefully and consider the different perspectives that have shaped how the case is remembered. For now, settle in comfortably and allow the story to unfold slowly. We will begin by traveling to the town of Pontefract itself and to the ordinary house where the strange events were first reported. The town of Pontefract sits in the north of England, surrounded by rolling countryside and quiet residential streets. For centuries, Pontefract has been known for its long and layered history. The town was once home to an important medieval castle and played a role in several key moments of English history. By the 20th century, however, much of the town had settled into a calmer rhythm, with families living in modest homes built during the post-war expansion of the 1950s and 1960s. Among these residential streets was East Drive, a quiet area where rows of similar brick houses lined the road. The homes were typical of British suburban development during that period. They were simple, practical, and designed for families beginning new lives after the hardships of the Second World War. Children played outside, neighbors knew one another, and daily life followed familiar routines. One particular house on East Drive would eventually become widely known because of the events that took place there. At first glance, the home looked no different from the others nearby. It was a small, semi-detached house with a garden, narrow hallways, and modest rooms, typical of houses built during that era. Nothing about the building itself suggested that it would one day become associated with one of Britain's most discussed paranormal cases. During the 1960s, the house became the home of the Pritchard family. Like many families moving into newly built housing developments, they were simply looking for a comfortable place to live. The neighborhood offered stability and community, and there was little reason to suspect that anything unusual might occur inside the home. In the beginning, life in the house appeared completely ordinary. Families living on East Drive went about their daily routines, leaving for work in the morning and returning home in the evening. The streets were quiet, and there were no reports of unusual activity in the surrounding area. For neighbors and visitors alike, the house was simply another residence in a peaceful neighborhood. However, as time passed, small and unexplained disturbances began to occur inside the home. At first, these events were subtle and easy to dismiss. Strange sounds might be heard during the night, or objects might appear to move slightly from where they had been placed. Such occurrences could easily be attributed to ordinary causes such as drafts, settling structures, or simple misunderstandings. Yet the disturbances did not disappear. Instead, they continued to occur and gradually became more noticeable. What had once seemed like minor household oddities slowly began to attract attention within the family. Over time, the quiet house on East Drive would become the center of a story that spread far beyond the town of Pontefract itself. During the mid-1960s, the house on East Drive became the home of the Pritchard family. Like many families settling into newly built housing developments at the time, they were simply looking for a stable and comfortable place to live. The home was modest but practical, with enough space for everyday family life. The quiet neighborhood of Pontefract seemed like a peaceful environment where routine and normality could easily take shape. The family consisted of Jean Pritchard and her children, including her teenage son Philip. Life inside the house followed familiar patterns during the early days after they moved in. Meals were shared in the kitchen, the children attended school, and evenings were spent relaxing at home. From the outside, the house appeared no different from any other residence on the street. For a period of time, nothing seemed unusual. The family settled into their new environment and adjusted to the rhythms of the neighborhood. Houses built in that era often produced ordinary sounds as materials shifted or temperature changes affected the structure. Small creaks or taps during the night were usually ignored, as they were common in many homes. However, over time, the family began noticing disturbances that seemed difficult to explain. At first, the events were minor. Objects might appear slightly out of place, or faint knocking sounds might echo through the house late at night. These sounds were subtle enough that they could easily be dismissed as part of normal household life. As the weeks passed, the disturbances appeared to occur more frequently. The family occasionally reported hearing noises that seemed to move through different parts of the house, sometimes coming from walls or floors where no obvious cause could be found. At first, these experiences created more curiosity than fear. The family tried to explain the sounds using practical possibilities, assuming there might be structural issues or natural causes within the building. Philip Pritchard would later describe some of the early disturbances as small but unusual occurrences that gradually began to stand out. Doors might open slightly without anyone touching them, or items might shift position in ways that seemed difficult to explain. Although these moments were brief, they left an impression that something inside the house did not behave quite as expected. Despite these experiences, life in the home continued as usual. Families often encounter unexplained sounds or movements in houses, and most of the time these events turn out to have simple explanations. At this early stage, there was little reason for the Pritchard family to believe that their home would soon become associated with one of the most discussed paranormal cases in Britain. Yet the disturbances did not fade away. Instead, they slowly became more noticeable and harder to ignore. What had begun as occasional unexplained noises would soon develop into events that caught the attention not only of the family but also of neighbors and visitors, who came to witness what was happening inside the house on East Drive. As the months passed after the Pritchard family settled into their home on East Drive, the unusual events inside the house began to become more noticeable. What had once been small and easily dismissed, disturbances gradually started to occur with greater frequency. Sounds that might have been ignored at first began to repeat often, enough that members of the family started paying closer attention. One of the earliest patterns involved knocking sounds that seemed to come from different parts of the house. These noises were sometimes heard late in the evening or during the night when the house was quiet. At first, the family assumed the sounds might be caused by pipes, changes in temperature, or the structure of the building settling. Houses often produce unexpected noises, especially during colder months when materials expand and contract. However, the knocking did not follow a predictable pattern. Some nights, the house remained completely quiet, while on other nights, the sounds seemed to move through the walls or floors as if they were coming from different rooms. Family members occasionally tried to locate the source, checking doors, windows, and pipes, but no clear explanation appeared. Alongside the noises, other small disturbances began to attract attention. Items that had been placed on tables or shelves were sometimes found in slightly different positions later in the day. At first, these changes were subtle enough that they might have been explained as simple forgetfulness. In busy households, it is common for objects to be moved without anyone remembering exactly when or how it happened. Yet, over time, the family began noticing that certain items appeared to move in ways that seemed harder to explain. A small object might fall from a surface without an obvious reason, or a door might swing open slowly when no one was nearby. These events were brief, but when they occurred repeatedly, they created a sense that something unusual might be happening inside the house. Philip Pritchard later described moments when objects appeared to shift or move unexpectedly while members of the family were present in the room. Such events were unsettling, but they did not yet suggest the dramatic disturbances that would later become associated with the case. At this stage, the family was still searching for ordinary explanations. As these experiences continued, the family began mentioning them to neighbors and friends. Conversations about the strange noises and moving objects spread quietly through the neighborhood. Some listeners suggested practical possibilities, such as loose fittings or drafts, while others expressed curiosity about what might be causing the disturbances. What made the situation more intriguing was that the events seemed to become stronger over time rather than fading away. The small disturbances that had once been occasional now began appearing more regularly. The house that once felt ordinary was slowly becoming the setting for a series of events that would soon grow far more dramatic than anyone initially expected. As time passed, the disturbances reported by the Pritchard family began to grow more intense. What had once been small noises and subtle movements of objects gradually developed into events that seemed far more difficult to dismiss. The house on East Drive no longer felt simply unusual at times. Instead, the disturbances began occurring with a frequency that made them impossible for the family to ignore. One of the first signs that the activity was changing involved objects moving more dramatically than before. Items that had once shifted slightly now appeared to be thrown or pushed across rooms. Small household objects might fall from shelves or tables, even when no one was standing nearby. These events often happened suddenly, leaving family members startled as they tried to understand what had just occurred. The disturbances were not limited to objects alone. The knocking sounds that had once echoed quietly through the walls now seemed louder and more forceful. At times, the noises resembled heavy banging, as though someone were striking the walls or floors from the inside. The sounds sometimes moved from one part of the house to another, creating the impression that something unseen was moving through the building. Family members began paying closer attention to when these events occurred. Some of the disturbances appeared to happen when several people were present in the house, which made the situation even more confusing. Witnesses sometimes described objects moving or falling in full view of those in the room. Moments like these made it harder to explain the events as simple misunderstandings or unnoticed movements. Another unusual element involved doors and furniture. On some occasions, doors were reported to open suddenly or close without anyone touching them. Chairs or other items might shift position across the floor in ways that seemed unexpected. These events did not happen constantly, but when they did occur, they left a strong impression on those who witnessed them. As the activity continued, the atmosphere inside the house gradually changed. What had once been a comfortable family home began to feel tense and unpredictable. Members of the household sometimes hesitated before entering certain rooms, unsure whether another disturbance might occur. The sense of uncertainty created stress and concern as the family tried to understand what might be happening. Word about the strange activity began spreading beyond the immediate household. Neighbors who heard the stories expressed curiosity, and some visited the house hoping to witness the disturbances themselves. The reports of moving objects and loud noises attracted increasing attention, and more people became aware of the unusual events taking place inside the home. With the disturbances continuing to grow stronger, the story of the house on East Drive was slowly moving beyond a private family experience. The strange events were beginning to draw outside attention, and soon the house would become the focus of visitors, investigators, and observers who wanted to see for themselves what was happening within its walls. As the disturbances inside the house on East Drive continued, the story gradually spread beyond the Pritchard family. What had once been private experiences, shared only within the household, soon became a topic of conversation among neighbors and friends in the surrounding area. The reports of moving objects, loud knocking sounds, and strange activity inside the house attracted curiosity from those living nearby. Residents of the neighborhood had known the family for some time, and many initially listened with interest, but also a degree of skepticism. Houses often produce unexplained noises, and stories can sometimes become exaggerated as they are repeated. At first, some neighbors assumed that the disturbances might have ordinary explanations, such as loose fixtures, drafts, or structural sounds within the building. However, as more stories circulated, curiosity grew stronger. Several neighbors visited the house to see whether they could observe the disturbances themselves. These visits were often informal gatherings where people spoke with the family and waited to see if anything unusual might occur. In some cases, visitors reported hearing knocking sounds or witnessing objects moving unexpectedly during their time inside the house. The presence of additional witnesses made the situation more difficult to dismiss as a misunderstanding experienced by only one family. When neighbors claimed they had heard or seen similar disturbances, the story began to gain credibility within the community. Conversations about the events spread through the town, and more people became aware of the unusual reports coming from the house on East Drive. Some visitors approached the situation with curiosity rather than fear. They hoped to observe something unusual and perhaps find an explanation for the strange events being described. Others arrived with a more cautious attitude, unsure of what they might encounter. The combination of curiosity and uncertainty created an atmosphere where people gathered not only to support the family, but also to witness the events themselves. The involvement of neighbors and witnesses marked an important turning point in the story. What had once been a private household experience was now becoming a widely discussed local mystery. The presence of outside observers meant that the events were no longer limited to the family's own perspective. As word continued to spread, interest in the case began reaching beyond the neighborhood. People outside the immediate community started hearing about the disturbances, and some individuals with a particular interest in unusual phenomena would soon arrive to investigate the reports more closely. As the disturbances inside the house on East Drive continued, the reports gradually shifted from unusual noises and moving objects to events that some witnesses described as more aggressive. The atmosphere inside the home had already become tense due to the repeated knocking sounds and unexplained movements. But new incidents began to create greater concern among the family and those who visited the house. According to accounts shared later by the family, some disturbances appeared to involve physical interactions that were difficult to explain. Objects that had once simply fallen or shifted were now sometimes described as being thrown with noticeable force. Small items such as household objects might suddenly move across a room or fall from shelves without warning, occasionally startling those nearby. One of the most frequently discussed aspects of the case involved reports that the disturbances sometimes seemed directed toward individuals inside the house. Family members described moments when objects appeared to move in their direction, or when sudden knocks and bangs occurred, close to where they were standing. These experiences made the situation feel more personal and unsettling than the earlier disturbances. Particular attention was given to experiences reported by Pritchard. Over time, he described incidents in which he felt pushed, pulled, or physically disturbed while inside the house. These moments were alarming not only to him, but also to those who witnessed the events or heard about them afterward. In some accounts, visitors present in the home claimed to have seen objects move or heard loud bangs occurring near the same moments Philip described feeling contact. It is important to note that reports from the time varied in detail, and not every witness described the same experiences in exactly the same way. Some individuals believed the events suggested the presence of a powerful unseen force, while others remained skeptical and searched for more practical explanations. Nevertheless, the stories of aggressive disturbances became a defining feature of the case as it continued to spread through the community. The idea that the disturbances might involve physical interaction made the situation seem far more serious than the earlier reports of unexplained noises. For the family living in the house, the repeated events created stress and uncertainty. The home that had once felt like a safe environment now seemed unpredictable, and the family struggled to understand what might be causing the activity. As these reports circulated among neighbors and visitors, interest in the case grew even stronger. Stories of violent disturbances inside the house attracted the attention of individuals who studied unusual phenomena. Soon, investigators with an interest in paranormal events would begin visiting the home to observe the disturbances for themselves and attempt to determine what might be happening inside the house on East Drive. As reports about the disturbances inside the house on East Drive spread beyond the immediate neighborhood, the case began attracting attention from individuals who studied unusual phenomena. During the 1960s, interest in paranormal research was growing in Britain. Groups dedicated to investigating unexplained events often traveled to locations where strange occurrences had been reported, hoping to observe and document the activity firsthand. The events in the Pritchard home soon became known among these circles. Investigators, journalists, and curious visitors began arriving in Pontefract to examine the situation for themselves. Some came with recording equipment or cameras, while others simply hoped to witness the disturbances that had been described by the family and their neighbors. One of the goals of these investigators was to observe the environment carefully and determine whether natural explanations could account for the reported activity. They examined the structure of the house, looking for loose fittings, unusual drafts, or structural issues that might produce knocking sounds or cause objects to move. In many cases, paranormal investigators attempted to rule out ordinary explanations before considering more unusual possibilities. Visitors who spent time inside the house sometimes reported hearing the same knocking sounds that the family had described. On occasion, objects were said to shift or fall during periods when observers were present. These experiences strengthened the belief among some investigators that the disturbances might involve a genuine, unexplained phenomenon. At the same time, not all investigators reached the same conclusions. Some remained cautious and suggested that psychological factors, misunderstandings, or environmental influences could still play a role. Houses can produce surprising sounds due to pipes, temperature changes, or shifting materials, and human perception can sometimes interpret ordinary events as something more mysterious when people are already expecting unusual activity. Despite these differing interpretations, the presence of investigators helped bring wider attention to the case. Their visits were sometimes discussed in local newspapers and among paranormal research groups throughout Britain. The house on East Drive gradually gained a reputation as a place where strange disturbances might be witnessed. As more people heard about the events, stories surrounding the case began to evolve. In addition to the reported disturbances, a new element entered the narrative. Some individuals began discussing an older legend connected to the area, a story involving a dark historical figure, sometimes referred to as the Black Monk. This legend would soon become closely linked to the disturbances reported in the house. Whether the story developed as an attempt to explain the events or simply grew from local folklore, the idea of a mysterious monk associated with the activity became one of the most memorable aspects of the case. As the strange events inside the house on East Drive continued to attract attention, another layer of the story gradually began to develop. Some people started connecting the disturbances with an older legend tied to the area around Pontefract. This story involved a mysterious figure who became known in later accounts as the Black Monk. Local folklore suggested that centuries earlier, a religious figure may have lived or worked somewhere near the land where the modern houses were eventually built. According to some versions of the story, this monk was said to have died under tragic or troubled circumstances. Over time, the tale evolved into a legend that the spirit of this monk might still linger in the area. It is important to note that historical evidence for this story is limited, and many historians believe the legend may have grown gradually as the events in the Pritchard house became more widely known. Nevertheless, the idea of a monk connected to the disturbances captured the imagination of many people who heard about the case. Descriptions of the supposed monk often portrayed a dark figure wearing traditional religious clothing, sometimes imagined moving silently through the house or appearing briefly before disappearing again. These descriptions were not consistent, and many witnesses never reported seeing any figure at all. Still, the image of the Black Monk quickly became part of the narrative surrounding the disturbances. Stories like this often develop when communities attempt to explain unusual events through familiar cultural ideas. In many parts of Britain, historical buildings and old religious sites are associated with legends of monks, spirits, or other figures from the past. When unexplained disturbances occur, these older stories sometimes become linked with modern events as people search for meaning or explanation. The legend also added a dramatic dimension to the case that attracted additional public interest. Reports of a violent poltergeist were already unusual, but the idea that the disturbances might be connected to a mysterious monk from centuries earlier made the story even more compelling. Newspapers, visitors, and paranormal researchers began referring to the case using the name that would eventually become widely recognized. Over time, the disturbances at the house were no longer discussed simply as unexplained activity. Instead, they became known as the events associated with the Black Monk of Pontefract. Whether the legend had any connection to the events themselves remains uncertain, but the story of the monk became inseparable from the case as it continued to spread beyond the town. The introduction of this legend marked another turning point in how the story was understood. While some people believed the disturbances might involve a supernatural presence, others continued searching for practical explanations. This difference of opinion would soon lead to debates about what truly happened inside the house on East Drive. As the story of the disturbances at the house on East Drive spread more widely, the case began attracting not only believers but also skeptics who wanted to examine the events more critically. While some visitors felt convinced that something unusual was taking place inside the house, others believed that the reports could be explained through more ordinary causes. This difference of opinion created an ongoing debate that has continued for decades. Skeptical investigators often began by looking closely at the physical environment of the house. Buildings can produce surprising sounds due to pipes expanding, wooden beams shifting, or changes in temperature affecting the structure. These natural processes sometimes create knocking or banging noises that can appear mysterious when their source is not immediately obvious. Some skeptics suggested that at least part of the reported activity might have been caused by such structural factors. Another possibility discussed by researchers involved the role of perception and expectation. When people enter a situation already believing that something unusual might happen, they may interpret ordinary events in ways that reinforce that belief. A small sound or movement that might normally go unnoticed can appear far more significant if observers are watching closely and anticipating strange activity. Some skeptics also considered whether human actions might have contributed to the disturbances, in cases involving moving objects or sudden noises. Investigators sometimes explore the possibility that individuals inside the house may have caused the events, intentionally or unintentionally. Such explanations do not necessarily suggest deliberate deception in every instance, but they recognize that misunderstandings, pranks, or accidental movements can sometimes create the appearance of unexplained activity. Debate also emerged around the reliability of witness accounts. Memories can change over time, especially when events are discussed repeatedly among groups of people. As stories are retold, details may become slightly altered or emphasized in different ways. This process can make it difficult to determine exactly what occurred during specific moments of the case. At the same time, supporters of the paranormal interpretation argued that the number of witnesses and the variety of reported disturbances made simple explanations less convincing. Some visitors claimed to have personally observed objects moving or heard loud noises that seemed to come from unknown sources. These accounts continued to fuel interest in the possibility that the events involved something beyond ordinary explanation. The discussion between skeptics and believers became an important part of how the case was remembered. Rather than producing a clear conclusion, the debate created a situation where different interpretations existed side by side. Some people viewed the disturbances as a genuine paranormal event, while others saw them as a complex mixture of environmental factors, perception, and storytelling. This ongoing disagreement ensured that the case remained widely discussed. As more people heard about the story, the house on East Drive gradually became known beyond the local community, drawing the attention of journalists and the wider public, as reports about the disturbances in the house on East Drive continued to circulate. The story gradually moved beyond local conversations and reached a much wider audience. Newspapers and magazines began showing interest in the unusual case unfolding in the town of Pontefract. Journalists traveled to the area to speak with the family, neighbors, and investigators who had visited the house. Media coverage played a significant role in shaping how the story was understood by the public. Articles describing the strange disturbances often focused on the dramatic elements of the case, including the reports of objects moving on their own and the stories of the mysterious Black Monk said to be connected with the house. These details captured the imagination of readers and helped the story spread far beyond the town itself. As the case gained attention, more visitors began arriving at East Drive, hoping to witness the events for themselves. Some were curious members of the public, while others were researchers interested in paranormal phenomena. The quiet residential street that had once been known only to its local residents suddenly became a place of unusual interest. For the Pritchard family, this increased attention brought both support and pressure. On one hand, some visitors believed the family's accounts and offered sympathy for the distress the disturbances were said to cause. On the other hand, the growing publicity also meant that the events were being examined closely by skeptics, journalists, and observers who questioned what might truly be happening inside the house. The media attention also helped solidify the name that would become permanently associated with the case. The disturbances were increasingly referred to as the activity of the Black Monk of Pontefract. This name combined the reports of violent poltergeist events with the legend that had developed about a mysterious monk connected to the area. Over time, the phrase became the standard way of describing the story in newspapers, documentaries, and discussions of paranormal history. Television and radio programs later contributed to the case's reputation as one of Britain's most famous poltergeist stories. Interviews with witnesses and investigators allowed the story to reach audiences who had never visited Pontefract or read the early newspaper reports. As a result, the case gradually became part of a larger cultural fascination with unexplained events. The growing publicity ensured that the story would continue to be discussed long after the disturbances themselves had faded. Whether people believed the events represented a genuine paranormal phenomenon or a misunderstood series of ordinary occurrences, the case had already secured its place in British folklore. By the time the attention from journalists and investigators began to slow, the house on East Drive had become widely known as the location of one of the most dramatic alleged poltergeist cases in the country. The legacy of these events would continue to attract curiosity and debate for many years to come. As the years passed after the disturbances reported at the house on East Drive, the events gradually moved from being a current local story to becoming part of a larger historical discussion about unexplained phenomena. The house in Pontefract remained physically unchanged from the outside, yet its reputation had transformed completely. What had once been an ordinary family home was now widely known for its connection to one of Britain's most famous alleged poltergeist cases. The story continued to attract interest from paranormal researchers, historians, and journalists. Some individuals visited the house hoping to understand what might have happened during the 1960s, while others simply came out of curiosity after hearing about the case through newspapers or television programs. Over time, the house on East Drive became one of the locations most frequently mentioned in discussions about reported poltergeist activity in Britain. Part of the reason the case remained so well known was the number of people who claimed to have witnessed unusual disturbances during the period when the events were reported. The involvement of neighbors, visitors, and investigators meant that the story included a wide variety of perspectives. Some witnesses believed strongly that they had observed genuine, unexplained activity, while others remained uncertain or skeptical about what had taken place. The legend of the Black Monk itself also played an important role in shaping how the story was remembered. Whether or not the figure described in local folklore had any connection to the disturbances, the image of a mysterious monk became inseparable from the case. Over time, the name Black Monk of Pontefract became a kind of shorthand for the entire series of events that had unfolded inside the house. As interest in paranormal subjects grew during the later decades of the 20th century, the story continued appearing in books, documentaries, and discussions about famous hauntings. Researchers often revisited the case when examining how reports of poltergeist activity develop and how different explanations can emerge around the same events. The Pontefract case provided a detailed example of how a local mystery could grow into a widely recognized story. Despite decades of discussion, the case has never produced a single explanation accepted by everyone. Some researchers remain convinced that the disturbances represented genuine paranormal activity, while others argue that natural causes, human actions, or misunderstandings may account for what witnesses experienced. The absence of clear evidence has allowed the debate to continue without a definitive conclusion. Today, the house on East Drive still stands as part of an ordinary residential street. For many residents of the area, it is simply another home in a quiet neighborhood. Yet for those who know the story, it represents a chapter in modern British folklore that continues to raise questions about what might have occurred within its walls during the 1960s. The legacy of the Black Monk of Pontefract lies not only in the events themselves, but also in the lasting curiosity they created. The story reminds us that even in modern times, some experiences resist easy explanation, whether viewed as a paranormal mystery or as a complex mixture of perception, storytelling, and circumstance. The case continues to invite reflection about how unusual events become part of history. As we reach the end of tonight's story, the house on East Drive returns to the quiet streets of Pontefract, where life today continues much as it does in any ordinary neighborhood. The events reported during the 1960s remain part of local history, remembered through interviews, newspaper articles, and the accounts of those who claimed to witness the disturbances. Yet, like many unusual stories from the past, the case of the Black Monk leaves more questions than answers. For the Pritchard family and the people who visited the house during those years, the experiences they described were deeply real and sometimes unsettling. Objects moving without clear cause, unexplained knocking sounds, and reports of aggressive disturbances created a situation that few people expected when the family first moved into their home. These moments left a lasting impression not only on those directly involved, but also on the wider community that followed the story as it unfolded. At the same time, the case also illustrates how mysteries often grow through the interaction of observation, interpretation, and storytelling. As different witnesses shared what they believed they had seen or heard, the narrative surrounding the house developed in multiple directions. Some explanations focused on the possibility of paranormal activity, while others suggested that natural causes or misunderstandings might account for the events. Stories like this remind us that human curiosity is often drawn to experiences that challenge ordinary expectations. When something unusual occurs, people naturally try to interpret it through the knowledge and beliefs available to them. Over time, these interpretations can become part of local folklore, shaping how future generations understand what happened. Whether the disturbances in the house on East Drive represented a genuine, unexplained phenomenon, or a complex combination of natural factors and perception, remains a matter of ongoing debate. What is certain is that the story continues to capture attention decades later, standing as one of the most widely discussed poltergeist cases in modern British history. If you found tonight's calm documentary relaxing or interesting, you are always welcome here. Subscribing to the channel and leaving a like helps support the creation of more long-form stories designed for peaceful listening. Many viewers return each evening to explore historical mysteries, while allowing their thoughts to slow down at the end of the day. Now the story gently comes to a close. There is nothing more you need to focus on or analyze tonight. The quiet streets of Pontefract fade into the distance, and you can simply allow your mind to rest. Let the calm of the night settle around you, breathe slowly, and drift comfortably toward sleep.